Professor Jeannie Fox-Tree, it's a real treat to be with you. I want to start by asking you about what drew you to the field of psychology.
Thank you for having me here. Before I begin answering, I want to thank FABBS and my nominators for this award. I'm deeply honored to receive it, and I appreciate the work that FABBS does. So what drew me to the field of psychology? I became interested in cognitive psychology the fall of my senior year in college. A faculty member let me into their psychology course on vision. I was a linguistics major who didn't know much about psychological methods, but I immediately realized the value of the tools used in psychology and started applying to psychology and cognitive science programs for graduate school. I was very interested in languages and had studied several, but I became more interested in studying language as a system of communication.
Is a great trajectory. Are there things about vision that strike you as carrying over to being a psycholinguist? Or did the vision fall away once you found your true love?
The vision course was a way for me to see a different kind of methods. So the methods that were being used at the time for me in linguistics didn't involve any tests of how people actually used language. They didn't involve experimentation. They didn't involve analyses. And so people were coming up with, at that time, it's changed since then, but at that time, people were coming up with ideas, but they weren't testing them with the tools used in psychology.
Oh, that totally illuminates the origins of your work for me. And it's changed in part because of that work.
And people weren't studying what I was studying in linguistics, what I
Yeah.
was interested in. They weren't studying how people spoke spontaneously. Not that many people, I should say.
Yeah, totally. So turning to psycholinguistics proper, what are a couple things, key things that you think everybody should know about language and psychology and their interface?
Language is a centerpiece of all of our lives. We use it to communicate with each other, to create societies, to convey information. But what is less obvious is exactly how we use language to achieve these things. For example, how do we go from an idea to an understandable utterance? How do we understand what others are saying to us? It's more than just learning the rules of a language or what words mean. It's about how we get things done together using language. And there are a lot of psychological processes that are part of this, from integrating words with facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language, to bringing all of our prior experiences to bear in understanding what people mean by what they say. Knowing how people communicate can help us have better conversations with each other. It can also help us have better communication with machines, which is increasingly becoming part of our everyday lives.
Yeah, boy, human machine communication is front of so many folks' minds last couple of years. It
It
seems like a
is.
topic that's always important. It kind of comes and waxes and wanes a little bit, but yeah, right now.
Well, it's going to keep on going through this century, I am sure.
And I mean, one of the striking things at this moment, it seems to me, is that the piece that's lagging in current systems, lagging the amazing capacities of some parts of those systems, is the capacity to engage in real-time synchronized interactions with a conversational partner that fit the dynamics of natural conversation.
Exactly. So, for example, machines don't ever say uh-huh to you while you're talking. So you don't know exactly what they're understanding or what their role is in a conversation. When you talk to a person and they say, uh-huh, you go to the next element in what you're about to say. If you talk to a person and they say, really, or wow, you go back and elaborate on what you've just said. So these little things that your addressee does, or even nodding, you affects what the speaker is saying, but machines don't do that. They don't communicate like people do.
Yeah, our viewers aren't going to be able to see this, but as you're talking, I'm nodding, so I don't have to say aha because you can see me. But if we were on the phone, I guess I would have to.
That's right.
So, okay, turning from psycholinguistics, you were a founder of the Spark Society and continue to be heavily engaged in its activities. Tell us a little bit about Spark.
The Spark Society is a professional society whose goal is to promote the professional development of historically underrepresented scholars in cognitive psychology and cognitive science at all phases of their careers, from undergraduates through to full professors. We're interested in both recruitment, such as undergraduates into PhD programs or graduate students into faculty positions, and retention, figuring out what it takes to keep historically underrepresented scholars in academia. And that includes keeping them engaged as their careers progress, not disengaging or retiring early. Part of the focus of the society is to build connections with allies. Diversifying a field is not something individuals from an underrepresented group can do on their own. Everyone needs to pitch in to create the structures that are conducive to broadening participation.
Amen to that. I want to ask if being in on the ground floor and of conceptualizing and implementing an organization like Spark has given you any advice to share or salient stories about founding a nonprofit.
Yeah, it does. My advice is to not be afraid to try something, even if it's a small thing. I think it can be hard to start a new project if you're imagining something big right at the beginning. But if you start with a small goal, in our case, it was an event at a cognitive psychology conference, you can build from there. Another element that can help is assembling a team with varied skill sets. Some may like being a public face or engaging with social media. Others may like event planning or fundraising.
Been a highly effective team that has guided Spark along these years.
I feel like I got really lucky with that.
So based on those experiences, what are some critical steps that institutions or organizations can take to foster a more inclusive and diverse scientific community?
One of the most critical steps an institution or organization can take is to show their values, not just talk about their values. I noticed the difference this made for me when the town I live in held a Martin Luther King Jr. Day March a few years ago, a collaborative event between the NAACP and the police. It was important to me to see the people who were participating in the march. For example, I saw people marching who were teachers at my kids' schools. This was important to me because it let me know who they could go to for support if they needed it. It's a public expression of our values. What does that look like in an organization? Well, for one thing, nothing can beat walking into a room and seeing an inclusive and diverse community. But what if your organization's inclusion goals aren't quite there yet? I think something that could help is having other indicators of values in the environment. The images chosen for a website, the artwork on the walls of a department, or activities people engage in. For us in cognitive psychology, maybe it could be a photo of faculty participating in Spark events with a Spark badge ribbon on their conference name tag.
That's a great point. Tell me about how your research interests and your priorities for mentoring and service, these different aspects of yourself as a psychologist and psycholinguist and scientist, how do they interact, if at all? Do you find that your approach to mentoring is affected by what you've learned in the lab or vice versa?
My research generally does not intersect with my service, but there is something I do in my mentoring that I think can also help with service. I try to create a tolerance for disagreement, including nurturing a willingness to change one's mind and to forgive mistakes. We know that you can't get far when you're working with people who say no to every idea, but you also can't get far when you're working with people who always say yes. People need to be able to disagree to make the best decisions. You need to be able to bring all sides of an issue out into the open. You need to be able to suggest things you're not quite sure of, to change your mind as you discuss topics, and to forgive others and yourself when things aren't working smoothly. This is true for creating science, but it's also true for mentoring and for working together with others on service projects.
That is such a great point. I think that, both for making new discoveries and for making and implementing new policies,
Mm-hmm.
you got to have a culture of grace. You've got to have like the ability to be open to changing your mind, to being wrong and pivoting. How, do you have any insights in how to build that culture? Because I've seen that it can be really easy to, it can be easily lost.
Yes, agreed. Or uh, just starting off with a culture of silence where people would prefer not to have a public disagreement. I'm not sure I have any special insight into that, but obviously somebody has to start by saying the thing that no one is expecting, maybe prefacing it with, I know this is an out there idea, but let me just say it and see what you all think. Maybe I'll change my mind about it later. And then encouraging people to express different viewpoints on it. And then being willing to say things like, I said this yesterday, or I said this earlier in this meeting, but now I've changed my mind.
Totally.
Or now I agree with what somebody else said. And I think continuous modeling of this hopefully can help. But I hear you when you're saying that it can be hard. And I think that cultures can be hard to change.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about modeling being wrong and being comfortable living with being wrong and realizing that you're wrong.
Exactly.
You know, that's not always super comfortable, but it's super valuable.
Right.
And modeling inclusivity in a discussion like those to me seem like two of the keys to running a decent meeting.
Right. And when you're trying to get to know people who are different from yourself, it, you're going to get something wrong. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. And you got to have grace for yourself and for the other folks in the room. What have you learned that you'd like to share with mentors, particularly folks who want to help make our science more equitable and inclusive?
People who want to make science more equitable and inclusive should talk to people who aren't the usual people they talk to. This can include giving a research talk at a local school, inviting high schoolers or college students to do a tour of your research lab, or running an information session for undergraduates to learn about graduate school. When it comes to your own mentees, it can help to make sure you're providing enough information and structure for your mentees to succeed. There is so much students need to learn about how science works. It can help everyone feel like they belong if we don't take knowledge for granted. The other thing I've done is talked openly about biases students may be facing. For example, I talk with my graduate students about known biases in teaching evaluations.
Yes, that could be a whole discussion of its own.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so many of these tools that we use, you know, have limitations, have biases, have unintended consequences. They may have great intent, they may even have great value, but balancing those things, those are challenges, no doubt. Are there any particular experiences or anecdotes that bring these points home for you?
In our efforts to support inclusion among the cognitive faculty at my university, we do a lot of bonding activities. Sense of belonging is especially important for success in STEM fields. It's not just a sense of belonging at the university, but a sense of belonging in the specific field the student is in. Something I've tried a few times now to foster belonging is group poetry writing. I do a brief review of what a haiku is, and then I ask people to write a haiku or a couplet or another poem about themselves, their research, or each other. After a few minutes, we go around the room and read out our poems. It doesn't have to be a quiet activity. People can collaborate on writing poems, but even if it starts off as quiet, it's not by the end when people go through everyone's creations. The idea is to create a shared, memorable experience where people are really engaged with each other, enhancing everyone's sense of belonging.
Oh, that is really cool.
It
I'm
works really well.
I'll
And
check.
it's so simple. I just basically told you how to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
mean, with 30 people, it takes about 30 minutes. So if you have an hour meeting, you still have time to get other work done.
that's awesome. I mean, haiku would be a perfect form. And
Yep.
there's a there's a related exercise I've heard of where you give people a topic and ask everybody to write a couplet. Um, and so then, and you can, formally you can string together rhyming couplets in like
That
an
is
A,
awesome.
B, B, C, C, D, D. It doesn't have to, you don't need a larger structure of that, but if it topically makes sense, it's going to sound good. And I've seen people come up with these great creations so that the organizer then is tasked with thinking about the sense of the couplets and how they string together.
That's awesome. You could do it just who we are as a organization, and
Yeah,
people could add couplets, and then you've got a poem that describes yourselves.
yeah, exactly. Have you had any success cases that you find particularly inspiring that keep you engaged in this work?
One of the most inspiring things I've seen is how much my field has diversified in the 30-something years since I was in graduate school. There's a big difference in who you see at conferences now from who you saw at conferences in the past. Who is admitted and who is successfully mentored in the field is part of it, but it's also about who applies to a program, which brings me back to the earlier question of showing values, not just stating them. Students will apply to programs where they believe the faculty in the programs will support them. 30 years ago, it seemed like few people were looking at their labs, noticing that everyone was from the same group, and asking themselves, why is everyone from the same group? And what can I do about it? Even just noticing this is an issue is a step in the right direction.
Finally, let me ask, looking ahead, what are you most excited about with respect to your science, to the practice of science, or both?
Diverse teams lead to path-breaking science. The more effort we put into engaging all voices in science, the more we have to look forward to in the future. The exciting thing is that we don't know what we're going to discover.
Thank you so much for this conversation, and for all of your work on behalf of the field. I can't tell you how much I personally appreciate it. And thanks and congratulations on behalf of FABBS.
Thank you.